why your podcast content isn't converting listeners into buyers. There is a difference between a podcast that attracts dream clients and ones that struggle. And the biggest difference lies across three different types of content. I'm going to get into that in just a moment. To paint this picture, right? Imagine you have two entrepreneurs who launch a podcast at the same time. Both massive experts in their field, and both are working, recording, editing, publishing every single week. They're doing all the right things that they should do in order to grow and monetize their show. But 6 months in, one of them is flooded with tons of inquiries from dream clients, while the other one is still stuck, kind of just wondering, hey, look, why the hell isn't this working? What's the difference? What gives, right? How can we have a situation where they both start at the same spot, both experts in their field, both been consistent, but both have a drastically different outcome? Here's the difference. One understood that podcast content isn't just about providing value, it's about strategically guiding your listeners towards the next step. Because here's the thing, most podcasters create incredible content, valuable content, all day, every day, right? And some of them figure out how to grow their audience through their content. But only few, and I really do mean only few, like we've worked with hundreds of podcasts, and very few podcasts know how to turn their listeners into booked appointments, into sales calls, into sales for their business. Now, this is an issue, right? Because if you're just creating content week in, week out, and you're not making money, it kind of sucks, especially when you might have an incredible program on the back end. But if you don't have the right systems, the right strategies in place, and you're just focused on value content, which I'll go into why that's a problem later on in just a moment, you're not creating the type of content that leads your audience to explore working with you, which means you won't make money, which of course is an issue when you're a podcaster who's trying to get more ROI for your business. If you're in a spot where you're not generating that income because you haven't got these things in place, well, again, this is an issue, right? And that's why most podcasters really don't make any real money from their show. And you might be in a spot where, you have a podcast, you genuinely love it, but you kind of feel like you should be getting more, like you're not really reaching its full potential. You might see other people who are generating income and you know it's possible, but for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be working for you. This right here is most likely the reason why, which is, on one side of things, it's frustrating because it's not working, but on the other side, it's good you found this video and you're watching this right now because you can see why these issues are occurring, and you can see that there's actually very simple fixes. So look, for most podcasters, there is a missing link between the podcast itself and your business revenue. It's not about just creating binge-worthy content and episodes. Everyone can do that. You're probably already doing that. You're probably just bloody smashing it. But it's also as important to craft episodes strategically with conversion in mind, with the intention that you're creating these episodes in order to attract, engage, nurture, and convert listeners into high-paying clients. And when you understand the difference between valuable content, which really is educating, entertaining your audience, growth content, which is all about expanding your reach and attracting new listeners to your podcast, and then finally, conversion content. When you understand this, that's when things start to click. That's when you can start making very specific and intentional changes to your show. That means you do get more growth. That means you do start to attract way more ideal listeners listen to your podcast who then want to work with you. But most podcasters don't have this, and most podcasters stay stuck with just the educational type of content, which is brilliant and is super valuable, but it doesn't always help them grow. So they stay stuck with stagnant growth. They just kind of just fluctuate. And then it also doesn't help them attract new listeners, and it definitely doesn't help them convert new listeners. So you might be the one out of these three types of content, but you kind of need all three in order to grow and monetize your podcast way faster. Imagine, for example, you have a friend who goes to the gym and all he does is train, right? And then he gets frustrated because he's been to the gym for, let's say, 3 to 6 months and it's kind of just plateaued. And you're like, dude, like, how's training going? He goes, yeah, training, I'm crushing it. And then he's kind of like, okay, so you're training, you're crushing it, but you're kind of stagnant. So like, are you recovering right? How's your sleep going? And he's like, sleep? Like, I get, 3 to 4 hours a night, I'm hustling, I'm in that grind mode, I'm working on my business, my side hustles. And you're like, all right, okay, all right. And then how about your diet? Are you dieting? You eating clean? Are you hitting your protein intake? Are you making sure that when you are training that you're eating properly? And then he looks at you like, my calorie intake and like, my diet. You'll probably be thinking to yourself, well, no wonder it's not working for you, right? Because yes, it's great. You've got one piece of the puzzle, which is training. He trains hard. That's amazing. But dude, you're not sleeping well. You're not recovering, which means you're not giving your body the time it needs to just repair and recover, right? How are you going to grow your muscles when they haven't got time to repair? And then on the other hand, you're not even feeding yourself properly. You're not even eating properly. So yeah, it's great. You've got one piece of it, but you need to be training properly. You need to be making sure you're getting the right recovery, and you goddamn need to be focusing on your diet. Similarly, if you're a podcaster who's out there who's stuck with stagnant growth and you're not generating more revenue from your podcast, it's great that you're producing, again, valuable content that's educational or entertaining. It's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. But you need all three. You need to create educational content. You need to create content that's growth driven to expand your audience. And you also need to create conversion content that's specifically made to get your audience taking the right steps. If you just have one, it's great, you're crushing that one, but you need all three of these in order for this to really work. And that is where so many get stuck. Now look, I'm not going to sit here and bitch and moan and complain and say this is why so many people are stuck. I am going to give you the solution in just a moment. But again, I think it's important to understand, look, why the hell is this happening in the first place? But once you make these changes, we have clients like Becca who woke up to 3 sales calls booked on her appointment within 24 hours, right? And she booked 6 calls within a week because we finally started using a very specific content conversion system. For her before, she was just focused on, again, just making valuable content, but that doesn't help her create, conversion content. And it wasn't until we made this change that things started to happen. Or Joshua, who booked 4 calls, closed 3 deals, and collected $16,000 cash in 7 days from his podcast, right? When he started creating in a much more intentional way. Now the question becomes, how can you start to create much more intentional episodes that are focused on converting your audience into actual clients? It's pretty simple. There's really 2 things you need to start doing. Now, I'm not going to focus on growth content. That can be a separate video. This is specifically to get your audience taking way more action. So there are 2 primary things you need to do. Number 1, you need to start prioritizing solo podcast episodes. You can't expect your audience to want to work with you and pay you big bucks, right? Like some of our clients, right? They're getting paid $3,000 to $10,000, for their coaching programs. You can't expect someone to pay you that if you're just interviewing guests and the guests you're having on your podcast are sharing all the value, sharing all the insights. And then at the end, you give a call to action to book on a call with you or to work with you one-on-one when your guest has been a source of value. That just wouldn't make sense. It'll feel super disconnected. When you start to prioritize solo podcast episodes, you're the person who's sharing your expertise, giving value to your audience, building that relationship on a much deeper level. And then when you go on to give, hey, buy my stuff, give me your money, right? When you go on to give your pitch, people are way more open to it. The same way that, you'll be so much more open to working with someone when you've gotten so much value from them. So that's the first thing. Just start prioritizing solo podcast episodes. The second thing is, when you're creating these episodes, start thinking about, hey, what are the problems my audience are going through? And how can I create what we call pain amplification episodes? Now, there's a lot more to this, but again, I want to just give you the 80-20 in terms of like what you can do right now. Maybe later on I'll make like a different video that's like a complete masterclass on the end-to-end funnel. However, what you want to do is start creating episodes that are more, pain amplification. An example of a pain amplification episode might be something along the lines of why you keep struggling with crippling anxiety. Or you'll never be anxiety free until you fix these 3 common mistakes. Something like that. The point is, the episode is super targeted at a pain point that your audience are going through. One that we've recently done is, why your podcast won't grow no matter how hard you try. Again, feels kind of ruthless. Look, you've got to play the game at the end of the day, and when you're able to present your podcast in a way that calls out your audience pain points, it kind of communicates that you have the solution. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you talk about people's pain points and they feel like they're seen. Like if my audience saw that title, they feel like they're seen, they feel like they're heard, and they feel like the episode was made for them and their situation. When they then click on that episode, it's important that for me, that the goal of the pain amplification episode is really to amplify the pain, kind of show them the consequence of them not changing their approach, show them how, them carrying on podcasting the way they are is kind of screwing them up. Or if you have one about anxiety, showing them how them not dealing with anxiety is completely screwing them up. Talking about the symptoms, their internal pain that they're going through, the internal struggles, and why actually these things are happening, and then showing them the consequence of them not making a change in how they're approaching solving their problems, which is, let's say again, anxiety. For you, again, your podcast could be about anything. It could be about migraines. One of our clients has a podcast about migraines. Regardless, right? The point is education and amplifying their pain. And 80% of your episode is really amplifying that pain. And then 20% is giving the high level solution. And then at the end, that's when you then invite them to book on a call, to purchase your program, to, buy your book, whatever it might be. But that's how you then use the podcast to, number one, attract the targeted listener by titling it something that sounds painful to them. Then number two, educating them about their problem, amplifying their pain, getting them really riled up and agitated. Realistically, people aren't going to make a change if they don't need to make a change. If they're just sitting there comfortable, this sounds great, but who cares? What, if I don't do this, I don't lose anything. So you have to then show them what they're going to lose. And when you show them what they're going to lose by staying the same, and then show them what they could gain if they made a change, that's when you then get them to a spot where they actually want to engage with you, because you're the person providing that value, giving them those insights. And then 20%, giving them high level. You don't want to give them the entire solution, because again, you want to tell them what to do but not how to do it, because you want to lead the episode naturally for them to book on a call and explore working with you. Because between you and me, right, that just providing valuable content is great. That has a purpose. You should still do that. But if your audience want to make real dramatic shifts, they need to work with you on a one-on-one basis. They need to actually go through a program that you've created. It's very hard to do that in a free format. Things are scattered, it's confusing. They don't know they're doing it right. They could get bogged down in the wrong information. The same way that really for you, you can watch all my YouTube videos and they will help you. Clients do get amazing results just with free content. But if you want to take things to that next level, I know in my heart that there's nothing better for you than my one-on-one personalized growth and monetization program, which is focused on helping experts and entrepreneurs grow podcasts that builds their personal brand and attracts dream clients to their business. So for you as well, when you're making this episode, do it right, do it intentionally, and you'll see you're going to get way more people buying your stuff, converting, joining your communities, all those stuff. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is how this conversion piece happens in terms of making sales. There's two ways you can do this. Number one is a direct path, meaning at the end of the episode, you just say to them, hey, book a call on my calendar. You have your calendar linked within your show notes. They go to your show notes, click on the link, open your calendar, find a time that works for them, and they book in. That's fine. That's a direct approach. And then there's the indirect approach where you give your audience a lead magnet at the end of your episode, a free resource in exchange for their email. And what would happen there is when you send them the free resource, you then start the sales conversation and essentially setting the appointment within the DMs. So it might look like, hey, I saw you wanted this free resource. Here you go. I'm curious to know where you're at now, where you're trying to go. And then yada, yada, yada. I'm going through this. I'm going through that. Interesting. Hey, by the way, we offer this. Are you open to seeing how we might be able to help you get to this result without this pain? Yes. Then you send them a link. So it doesn't matter which direction you go. The end point will always be you into an appointment or a sales call. So with that being said, I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.